Good afternoon, participants. Welcome back to the afternoon session. And I'd like to say good morning to Antonia. Sorry for keeping you waiting. Let me first give you an overview of what's going to happen in this afternoon session. We are going to have 4 very distinguished lectures from various speakers from all around the world. And therefore, there will be some short breaks between each presentation because we do need a few minutes to set up the presentation. So to start with, we have a keynote lecture to begin with in the afternoon session. The keynote lecture will be given by Ms. Antonia Cornaro. Antonia studied communications, social sciences, and urban planning at New York University. She has over 20 years of experience as an urban and transport planner, working for public and also private clients in many different cities, including New York City, London, Zurich, many others. And since 2010, she has been an expert and business development manager for Amber Engineering, which is an internationally very active consultant from Swiss, specializing in underground space or underground infrastructure design and management. And Antonia focuses on urban underground space with the aim to increase mobility, livability, and resilience of urban areas. Antonia is also the co-chair of the International Tunnel and Underground Space Association's Committee on Underground Space. And she's very passionate about cities, global and sustainable development, and has published and also presented many lectures on this subject. And she has also co-authored a book called Underground Space Unveiled, Planning and Creating the Cities of the Future, together with another author of Ken Emerald. Antonia has also just started giving lectures as a part-time lecturer at ITACUS, the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, on a course called Planning of Underground Space, offered to master students in civil engineering and also spatial planning and infrastructure systems. So today, Antonia is going to give us a keynote address on a topic called future-proofing our infrastructure while contributing to smart and sustainable city development. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Antonia. Over to you, Antonia.
Good morning, Johnny. Thanks for the nice introduction. Good morning from me from Switzerland. It's early morning here. And in fact, it was still dark a half an hour ago. So I'm glad I'm now with daylight and we can start my presentation. So as Johnny said, I will present today on future-proofing our infrastructure and contributing to a smart and sustainable city development. I'm really sad I can't be in Hong Kong personally for this presentation, as we had discussed initially when we first planned that I would speak. I love coming to Hong Kong, and obviously it's difficult at the moment to travel, as we all know. So I really commend IC Hong Kong for having gone ahead in a virtual manner with this conference. So I want to say a few words about the ITA Committee on Underground Space, which I'm the co-chair of. We love space underground. We think deep, and we think our cities become richer and more sustainable and more resilient when we optimize and utilize the underground to its fullest potential and incorporate it in our planning and development schemes of our cities. This is, by the way, the Women's University in Seoul, Korea, which was sort of dug into the ground in an open pit manner, but having very nice light to the classrooms on the sides, and opening the park, the general lineated walkway through it as a public park and access. Quick word about the book I co-authored with Han Admiral, and we have presented that in Hong Kong 2 years ago at the ITACUS conference in November 2018. It's called Planning and Creating the Cities of the Future, and I would really recommend it to anybody interested in sustainable urban development. Today we're covering sort of challenges for urban areas. What are we facing? What is the concept of resilience? What does it mean? And how can we develop contemporary and future solutions to future-proof our cities? How does disruption affect us? And how do we deal with space, time, and speed? And I will close with some conclusion. I also want to tell you that I've incorporated a few polls during the presentation. So you will see poll questions coming up at certain times. This is to keep you interested and awake maybe after a heavy lunch, hopefully not heavy lunch, hopefully a nice lunch, and guide you through the presentation and think along with me a little bit on this topic. So our challenges for urban areas are manifold. Sort of growing populations and migration into cities cause an increase of threatened people in case of disasters. Increasing natural disasters and effects of climate change are really the new reality. So cities are facing challenges to get prepared. They need to deal with shocks and stresses and be able to bounce back. Future-proofing is a concept that affects our infrastructures and how we will operate in the future. So with the integration of underground spaces in cities' development plans, our cities have a chance to become more resilient and to really avoid or reduce or at least adapt to stresses and shocks. So when we look at, for instance, these numbers of climate-related disasters around the world, the figure shows the number per year, and it illustrates that natural hazards are increasing in occurrence and are impacting society. They have the potential for severe loss of life, disrupting the city, and inflicting major costs. You see here the increase of floods, storms, droughts, and extreme temperatures. So when we look at floods and heavy rainfall and its significant effects on our cities, why is that? Well, city surfaces have been hardened. We've paved them all over, as this really serves the primary purpose of our city life, namely mobility. This has a huge impact in terms of diminishing the natural infiltration of rainwater. So, for instance, the rainwater then goes into our sewer systems, but when we have heavy rainfall, this leads to overstretching of the sewer systems and their capacities and the water treatment plants. And secondly, the lack of natural infiltration may lead to groundwater tables lowering and soils drying out. Storms are another phenomenon that are causing major problems, both as single events and in combination with other events. So, for instance, droughts followed by a storm cause dust storms. We can also experience drought, which is the direct opposite of increased precipitation. The consequences include lack of drinking water, failing crops, wildfires, as we see right now in many areas of the world, but also flash floods once rainfall occurs due to the dry, dense surface. And drought is, of course, associated with heat. And as global temperatures rise, our cities are affected by what is called an urban heat island effect. So the hardened surfaces and the abundance of concrete in urban areas mean that our cities have the capacity to soak up heat and retain it. And retaining heat causes urban areas to be hotter than surrounding rural areas. As you can see here, we have a peak in the downtown. So that's really the core of my presentation, that we need to really consider the Sustainable Development Goal of the United Nations, which is sustainable cities and communities. How do we reach this? How do we create resilient cities? How do we create smart cities? How do we create sustainable cities? And above all, we want livable cities. So I will say a little bit about resilience as a concept. Well, resilience is really the capacity of individuals, communities, and systems to survive, adapt, and grow in the face of stress and shocks, and even transform when conditions require it. So building urban resilience requires looking at a city holistically, understanding the systems that make up the city and the interdependencies and risks they may face. So at any given moment, more people than ever before are being threatened by local events like storms, rainfall, or enduring heat waves. And we need to see how we can deal with that from an urban development perspective. So the Rockefeller Foundation has defined the city resilience framework as having sort of 4 dimensions of the framework with further drivers. And we are really looking at the one on infrastructure and environment today, which affects our industry, of course, the most. But the others are also important factors in this framework. So this is really something that can be broken down to chronic stresses and acute shocks. So chronic stresses, you can see what they are, for instance, and acute shocks. So chronic stresses are really slow-moving disasters that weaken the fabric of a city. And acute shocks are sudden, sharp events that threaten a city. Those are the ones we speak of in this presentation. And I just want to give some examples of how cities are dealing with, for instance, getting rid of the heavy overpaving of their urban cities and transforming some urban corridors into green spaces. So this is, for instance, the Seoul city government has unveiled this plan to build a gigantic linear park on the city side of the country's oldest highway, which will be turned into an underground roadway. And it will stretch to almost 8 kilometers. And it's currently being designed and prepared for implementation. And this will be, of course, an immense asset to the city of Seoul. We have several examples of cities that are taking down obsolete urban highway structures, like here in Alaska, the old Alaskan highway with a double-deck roadway completely delineating the city center from the urban waterfront. And this is the situation now with the bored tunnel underneath and opening the space for greenery and pedestrians. Another very nice example is Madrid. The Madrid-Rio highway, which was really sort of multi-lane on both sides of the river, has been tunneled and is now converted into a over 1 million square meter park. Sorry, my slide was jumping. Yeah. And I don't have to stress how much this increases the livability of the city in terms of renaturalizing the river, in terms of granting access to the river, but also I can see here big dollar signs. In terms of value of real estate shooting up big time. This is another one. I don't know, this came along, my little scribble. In Rotterdam with an elevated railway that was taken down and has been converted into this beautiful market hall. And Rotterdam was really bombed heavily in the Second World War. The sentence was this derelict, was unattractive. Commercial values were down. The shopping didn't work. The people didn't like to aggregate here, and now it has become a new magnet and impulse for the city's redevelopment, both for local residents and tourists. And in fact, this is a market in here, and then you have apartments in the sides and with very nice artwork on the walls. So we want to say also a little bit about how the subsurface can also threaten us. So the subsurface can sort of play two roles in urban resilience. The first role is that of a possible stressor. So beneath the surface could be acting processes that threaten the surface over time. For example, sinkholes. A deeper knowledge of geology is what helps to counteract here. And secondly, the use of underground space could help alleviate some of the stresses acting on the city and play a role in urban resilience in the aftermath of an event. And I will show you examples of that. So this is, for instance, an example of the threatening subsurface. So the biggest threat of how the subsurface can be a liability for the city is earthquakes. And these are natural phenomena, but also human interventions can cause artificial earthquakes, or as they're also called, sinkholes, often caused through the collapse of old mine galleries or shafts. Data is often not available whether a threat exists or not. Also, when we extract resources from the subsurface, that can cause, for instance, in the Netherlands, this has caused, well, artificial earthquakes were happening and caused by gas extractions, and houses were being damaged and falling down. The third one is contamination, brownfield contamination, which can seep into groundwater and aquifers. So processes below the surface really have a different time scale from life at the surface. It can take many years for brownfield pollution to actually reach the groundwater. Once it does, the possibility of contamination and the effect of that on drinking water supplies could be enormous. So it is really human interventions in the past that were never documented that raise concerns. Preventing those stresses from occurring or being prepared for them requires an extensive understanding of urban geology and interventions by humans and the existing physical constructions. So urban resilience really requires in-depth knowledge of geology, geohydrology, geochemistry, and past human activities below the surface, for instance, from mining. And also surface uses, both past and present, that could interfere with ecosystem services. Even when not considering to actively use the subsurface, knowledge of it is required to assess urban resilience and identify potential chronic stresses and acute shocks. So how do we meet the challenges using underground space? And you can give your opinion on the poll while I continue with my presentation. So, for instance, in Japan, has already carried out studies how to utilize the underground spaces and how they could protect against earthquakes as far back as the 1930s. The enclosed properties of underground spaces provide protection against earthquakes and can be used to enhance resilience. Also historically, large diameter underground tunnels have suffered less damage than surface structures during earthquakes, and that has been proven over and over. I have seen myself live footages from an earthquake in Santiago, Chile, where the metro system was only minorly shaken, whereas on the surface, the earthquake was causing major destruction. So how about what the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction says in that sense? Well, they say the use of underground space as part of DRR measures can design large-scale underground spaces, e.g. car parks, tunnels, etc., so they can serve a variety of disaster risk reduction functions. And they name here, for instance, temporary water retention basins in terms of floods or as refuges, while also providing efficient access for servicing dense urban building blocks with water, with energy, or waste removal systems. And I see here some of you have already taken the poll. 45% agree, 28% strongly agree with that statement. That underground space can in fact enhance the resilience or provide opportunities to strengthen the city's resilience. So this is, for instance, an example of a massive temple-like cavern. And you see the sheer size of this compared to these humans who are visiting as a sort of attraction it has become. It serves as an intermediate storage facility in case of heavy rainfall or floods, and is later pumped empty after the event has happened. And that can really help Tokyo, but also other cities, these kind of schemes, to avoid flooding in concrete covered areas. We have other examples where we can enhance resilience by providing and enhancing protective natural and human-made assets. For instance, the sea defense sand dunes along the North Sea coast in the Netherlands, they also contain an underground car park, enhancing this natural and human-made asset. And you see a picture how that looks here. So obviously the Netherlands being very low-lying country, and a lot of its regions or land masses actually lie below the water table. They have always had very strong sea defense structures, and the dunes are a major natural occurrence that helps them deal with water ingress in heavy storms or agitated sea times. And these dunes, they have artificial created, but also used as underground car parks. And that is really like a dual function here that is being done in a very clever way. So the use of underground space as part of the drivers towards urban resilience, and we have seen examples in infrastructure environment. These are sort of the three avenues this can take. I've shown examples in the first one just now with the dune. Then we can also ensure continuity of critical services, and we can provide reliable communication and mobility. So how do you ensure continuity of critical services when a threat of climate change has happened and it's more frequent, for instance, highly intensive precipitation? Well, this poses a problem for cities without urban drainage. You can imagine. But for cities that have drainage systems, the capacity is often such that not all rainfall runoff can be dealt with, and that results in flooding. And we have examples here from Rotterdam, the Netherlands, where an underground car park contains a water retention basin. So this is the normal mode. car park in the city center, very convenient. In case of floods, the car park is closed and it serves as a water retention. And we've just looked at this example from Tokyo with water retention. How do we provide reliable communication and mobility in such times? Well, the extensive use of the subsurface for pipelines and communication cables ensures the continuity of communications and vital supplies, irrespective of the circumstances above ground. So being below the surface makes these systems independent from exogenic forces like storms. Here we have an example. The city of Prague has a 90-kilometer-long network of utility tunnels serving the city, carrying gas pipes, steam pipes, water mains, and high and low voltage cables, as well as telecommunication cables. This is what that looks like. And we can imagine how vital that is in a major disaster if this keeps functioning. So just a quick example, for instance, the Gujarat International Finance Tech System, where we have a connected industry on top and we have a connected infrastructure at the bottom, and you see that here. There's really over 7.5 kilometers utility long tunnels and 15-kilometer long carrying potable water, cooling water, power, and other vital services such as telecommunication, but also waste. And we have a lot of the critical infrastructure above here as well, and it can all be integrated in one scheme. So when we look at people and economies and how they depend on transport, we need to ask ourselves, are our existing transport modes sufficiently future-proof? Can they cope with ever-increasing demand? Can they meet CO2 reduction demands? And are they resilient to the effects of climate change and natural hazards? And just as sprawl signifies the ever-expansion of cities, available surface space is limiting ever-expanding infrastructures. So in urban planning, we see a trend moving away from the concept of mega monocentric cities to polycentric cities. So I have a lot of different cities that are sort of have the same kind of weight or strength, and we distribute resources and people to not have it all in one major center. But no matter the current situation, there's an ever-growing demand for transport of people and goods. And I think we can all experience that. Polycentric cities will require public transport systems to connect the systems together. And we really need to rethink the way we transport people and goods. And this requires future-proofing of our infrastructure. What are our contemporary solutions and how we deal with this? Well, we always strive for more speed. So we see a big increase in high-speed rail networks all over the world. And we always strive to add more capacity. We expand our existing infrastructure and we add intelligence. Quick look at the railway map of China with showing the massive, dense, vast high-speed rail network and the bullet trains that are famous throughout that region, but also in Japan and other Southeast Asian nations, and of course Hong Kong has major terminals serving these regions as well with amazing high-speed rail connections, transporting ever more people at ever higher speeds. Well, in Europe there's similar networks, I would say, where, for instance, France or Spain have very advanced, fast, high-speed rail networks connecting the various polycentric centers and the various urban populations. But also, we are looking at more capacity and additional space within our spatial boundaries in general. We're widening our road spaces to the max, and we're reducing the vertical separation minima. to the max. In fact, we're doubling the capacity of airways. And I think this is a bit of an exception now with COVID-19, where we see empty skies, and we're not at full capacity at all. But you've seen all the years leading up to now have been not a slot was wasted pretty much, and people were increase in air travel was constant. But what did Albert Einstein say about solving problems? Well, we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. We're squeezing the last drops from our infrastructures and contemporary transport modes without looking for new lemons. What can be future solutions? Well, disruption is showing the way forward, and underground space has the expansion potential, as it is yet relatively underused. We have one contemporary system that conceptually shows us new avenues to explore and develop. So when we look at, for instance, new market disruption, Uber or Tesla, there's a move away from the private car ownership to shared and on-demand ownership, to electric vehicles, to automated and autonomous vehicles, meaning will we need so much parking in the future? Hyperloop, ultra-high-speed transport of people and goods, allowing for larger regional dispersion and polycentric cities. And cargo souterrain, the development of an underground cargo moving system in Switzerland, which I will say a few words about in a minute. So what can we say about disruption? Well, low-end disruption would be in our case that we have mixed-use systems, that we utilize the underground transport systems for both people and goods, that we don't create monostructures that only serve one purpose. So the use of underground space in terms of contemporary and future infrastructure requires space. But we are rapidly running out of surface space, and we need to keep our cities livable. We cannot use every last bit of public space for new infrastructures. And underground space offers a lot of advantages in that sense. It is easier to create unhindered and direct connections. It has no surface impact on communities, no environmental impact on the surface, rapid development of a new layer of supplemental infrastructure is possible, and allowing new combinations that serve the modern needs of the city and combine disruptive developments. So new systems will not replace the old systems. That is my observation. There will be no cutoff, no immediate transition. Old and new will need to exist next to each other. New systems will supplement at first and replace later. And this requires additional space in already densely populated urban areas. Let's look at the tunnel concepts. I believe many of you might be from the industry where we design and manage and construct underground structures. The tunnels have a long history. They come in all shapes and sizes. They have been traditionally created for transport, for sewers, and for pipelines. Usually they have one thing in common. They are mono-use. But what if we could harness the tunnel concept and future-proof it? The power of what if? What if we could come up with a mixed-use tunnel concept rather than the mono-use contemporary use? And you're now being asked the second polling question: do you think it is likely that more tunnel systems will be multi-use in the future, and thereby contributing to a smart and sustainable city? See, I can vote as well, that's fun. And I carry on talking about future-proof infrastructures. So disruption and disruptive technologies, the use of underground spaces, and building on the tunnel concept from a mixed-use perspective. So for instance, in our book, we deal with that in chapter 10, how disruption is creating new paradigms for an urban underground future. Space, time, and speed, all three are of essence if we are to achieve the much needed disruptions and paradigm shifts that will challenge our conception of where we live, where we work, and how we travel. And I would say disruption is here to stay. And what is disruption? Well, this graph shows it very well. Innovation is doing the same things a little bit better. Then we do new things. And then we have disruption, making things that make the old things obsolete eventually. And I see you have been polling here. 35% of you think it's very likely that this will happen, and 33% think it's likely. And you're still submitting your choices. There's also 10% of you who think it's unlikely that we will use the underground structures for multi-use purposes. So examples of disruptions are, for instance, PayPal challenging banks, Apple credit cards challenging existing credit card companies, Uber challenging the taxi business, Airbnb challenging the hotel business, Hyperloop challenging contemporary transport, and mobility as a service challenging private car ownership. And the victims here are really the established companies, which are caught like rabbits in the headlights of the aggregator companies. Aggregators use new technologies to shift to a new paradigm on accommodation, for instance, or mobility, which is our core topic. The aggregators are disruptive, and the disruption itself is causing a transition to what will inevitably become the new normal. So disruptions hurt and challenges the common way of doing things, and new paradigms will come into existence through disruption that shape the way forward to the future. How do we bridge space, time, and speed in the future? Can we look at urban density through satellite cities? Well, 2/3 of the population will live in cities by 2050. That's a staggering number. Most of these cities are in coastal regions prone to permanent flooding due to climate change. Can we halt the migration to cities by creating density through connected satellite cities in what are now emptying rural areas? What if we could travel 1,002 kilometers a day in 60 minutes? Hyperspeed is what we are looking at here. This is what the design looks like of the Hyperloop system, resembling a large elongated tube carried on columns, much like the elevated structures of the past of highway systems that cities are taking down now to reunite neighborhoods. So as promising as Hyperloop may be, it is hard to see how it will be accepted if this is the design. It could be further enhanced if a radical decision was taken to turn it into an underground concept. This is the proposed system in Montreal, Canada. And many cities have looked at major urban corridors: New York, Washington, Paris, Amsterdam, Dubai, Abu Dhabi. And it will be very interesting to see what will develop with that in terms of how it will actually be feasible and built. And this is the man who initiated this all, Elon Musk. And what he said is, to solve the problem of soul-destroying traffic, roads must go 3D, which means either flying cars or tunnels. But he says, unlike flying cars, tunnels are weatherproof, out of sight, and won't fall on your head. And here he has his testing facility in California, and he's currently testing having the Tesla be brought down into a tunnel system. He's also developing a mass rapid transit system for the city of Atlanta to connect the city center to its airport, and also in Las Vegas to connect people around underground. And he's really challenging the way we construct tunnels conventionally and how much time it takes and also how much it costs. And he wants to find new ways to make it faster and cheaper. He also has started the Hyperloop challenge with many student teams around the world working on developing and designing the perfect pod, because this is what is so difficult if we are not safe and secure and comfortable in being shot around as humans in these pods. We can also look at large connecting tunnel schemes being planned all over the world, which are becoming longer and longer and deeper. So for instance, we've worked on the binational feasibility study for a 100-kilometer-long undersea tunnel for passengers and cargo to connect Helsinki and Tallinn, which is really viewed as one economic region and is currently only connected by relatively slow ferry traffic. And here's the Disruptor. He's a multimillionaire Finnish mobile game developer who invented Angry Birds, and he says, this is the European Silicon Valley. We cannot go the conventional ways. It takes too much time. He's trying to raise funds to compete with the government schemes to develop this major corridor tunnel concept. But also we need to look at future-proofing and disruption and resilience in terms of how we will feed our future populations. And here we, for instance, have examples of how can we grow food in a protected environment close to city centers, requiring less water and no pesticides. This is, for instance, an example from SCOUT, the Swiss Center of Applied Underground Technologies, which is working on a proof of concept in the Hagerbach test gallery underground in Switzerland to show closed loop systems raising trouts and greenery and salads and food in an underground system, because this will also be a major issue in the future, how to feed our urban population and how to feed them with good organic food and in an environmentally conscious way. But also let's have a quick look at overcoming logistic bottlenecks. And this is a quite smart scheme, I would say, also developed in Switzerland, Cargo Souterrain. Here you see the whole network that is being planned, an underground transportation system connecting major urban centers in Switzerland. It will start in 2030. And it is purely funded by private funds, which is very interesting. And the orange one is the first major one that will be the leg that will first be developed. And it's really bringing down cargo to the underground and having it in automated little vehicles. It can also combine, it can actually combine goods transport with data transport and pipeline transport. And that's why I'm bringing the example. So the tunnel provides a multi-use utility and transport corridor. It's a sustainable and resilient system. It's minimal surface-based pressure is needed and enhances disruptive technologies such as automated and autonomous vehicles. And it has it all worked out all the way to the final mile delivery, how it's going to work. And I don't have time to go at it in detail, but it has a dedicated website and you can look it up. It's dedicated goods infrastructure, decongesting the overland transport, working 24/7, multimodal, flexible, available around the clock, and it will take 40% of freight traffic off the motorway system. So this is really like a way to digitalize and to revolutionize cargo transport, like when we went from this phone to this phone. So how can we foresee an urban underground future? And you will have a poll now if you think it is important to think of future-proofing in your project work. Contemporary thinking on urban underground space and future extensions of dense urban cities look like that, where we really have open air underground space. We're opening up the underground. We create pedestrian passages close to the surface with natural light. We apply the concept of multi-use, public transport, public spaces, shopping, parking, densifying the city without using up precious land on the top. And we use geothermal energy as well to have energy efficient concepts in place. This is what the scheme looks like. But also we must never forget we build for people, and we should create valued underground spaces. And there are many very good examples of that where I don't have time to go into it at the moment, but you see some pictures where we really create beautiful additions to our urban cores. So 40% of you think it is important, and 53% think it's important, and 40% of you think it's very important that we forget now what the exact question was. Sorry, but thanks for answering the poll. We can also discuss this afterwards in the questions. 5% moderately important, 3% slightly important. Okay. So, and we're creating more and more urban mobility transport hubs, intermodal facilities. This is, for instance, the Utrecht Central Station, but I'm also thinking at Kowloon in Hong Kong, which is, to me, an amazing example of how you can open up the space, of how you can really accommodate so many modes and create a pleasant park space on top. So in conclusion, we need to start thinking disruptively and move away from a strategy of ever expanding what we have been doing for ages. Underground space offers an opportunity to develop supplemental infrastructure systems that can eventually replace contemporary systems. Additional advantage is freeing up surface space to maintain the livability of our cities. The relationship between urban resilience and the subsurface needs to be assessed in terms of the threats it could hold, but also of the opportunities to enhance urban resilience through shelter, through water retention, through emergency food storage, through vital communication lines, etc. And balancing urban development above, at, and below the subsurface, is the key for future development, in my opinion. It is not just about solving issues in the short term, though, and through innovation or sub-optimization. It is about disruption by doing things differently and challenging common perception, like I've shown you. It is about contributing to a livable future on this planet, and possibly other planets as well. So underground space offers as yet untapped potential. Through disruptions, these potentials can be unlocked. It will require imagination, adapting legislation, and developing more advanced and faster technologies. But why would an urban underground future be less disruptive than PayPal, Uber, Airbnb, and Hyperloop are already? The future is out there. A large part of that future is still below the surface. And our job is to unveil what is hidden and to use it for smart and sustainable city development by creating connectivity and combining uses. And with that, I thank you. I have included my details here, also that of my co-authors and co-chair of ITACUS, who has also contributed his thoughts to this presentation. And we have a dedicated website, thinkdeep.net, which shows our book and its content. Here is the website of ITACUS, itaitus.org, and our committee's work, We have a LinkedIn group. Here you can see more about Amberg, and ITACUS is also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you so much. I hope I didn't take up too much time. Thanks, Johnny.